If you've played Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty, you'll no doubt remember the Chimera. It's a hulking, spider-like tank that chases you relentlessly, destroying every piece of the building around you before trapping you in a one-on-one battle. It's the biggest boss fight in the whole game, and was a monumentally complex sequence for developer CD Projekt Red to create.
We wanted this boss fight to be the biggest and the most epic in the Cyberpunk game.
We wanted to have this, gigantic behemoth robot that somehow is turning against you, but we didn't know at the beginning how it's gonna turn against you.
You will not believe how many issues we had with this.
Son of a bitch went haywire!
So how was this intricate multi-stage mission put together? We spoke to multiple developers from across several different departments to find out what the joys and complications were. This is how Phantom Liberty's Chimera encounter was built, from concept to controller. The thoroughly elaborate design process for the Chimera started with the most simple of propositions: a big boss battle with a big boss tank.
I had a very small brief, and it was something like this. We want to do a boss fight that will be a spider tank. Internally, we always refer to it as a spider tank, but in fact, it's not a spider because it has 6 legs, so it's not really a spider. And it's not actually a tank because it doesn't have a crew. So Chimera fits better.
For a moment, we became this kind of military designers creating a tank, right? And figuring out how, with this advanced technology, how we will be designing this device so it could actually potentially operate in real time.
At the beginning, we didn't have this almost claustrophobic environment in mind. So we also thought about maybe we can have this tank jumping around, but we decided that we wanted something heavier, something scary.
That desire for heft and weight informed the complete look of the Chimera. It was built to impose itself on both the tight confines of its surroundings and the player, who is tiny by comparison.
We thought that it would be perfect. With this kind of man versus the machine, David versus the Goliath moment where we have to, as a single person, fight with something so massive and elaborate and powerful.
We didn't have a perfect gameplay idea at the beginning, so we started with many legs, high legs, something smaller, something bigger. When one of those sketches were chosen, we were like, okay, now we need to block it out, so we have a very rough 3D model so they can test it in the level. That one was a little bit more similar to the final one, and I tried to keep the shape as similar to that block out, even when I started adding details in 3D and make it more believable, more like a real tank.
So there was a lot of iterations on even an accomplished model of changing something, replacing things, adding range of motion, tweaking something so it has a capability of rotating faster, moving faster, etc. Adding grenade launchers, eventually adding also the drone compartments, which were not part of the original design, but it was needed to add an additional phase of the combat in the third stage of boss fight.
But despite neither being a spider nor a tank in the end, the eagle-eyed among you will be able to spot some remnants of the original design that remain to this day.
If you look closely at the design of the tank, and if you look at the rear section, there's a quite big door. At the beginning, we didn't know that we are not going to use a crew. So that door was supposed to be the opening for the crew, but we ended up having a huge drone, essentially, and the door is still there.
Meet the Chimera, a combat prototype from militant stables.
Being an automated machine rather than a crewed vehicle allows the Chimera to move in a more animalistic way. Unhindered by the limitations of humanity, its motions are free to be animated in a way that better reflects its natural world influences.
We were mostly relying on scorpions, beetles, things that have 6 legs, because it's very important to, pick up the balance on how he's moving, the motion, the body motion that Chimera is showing through the entire sequence, how heavy it's gonna be, always having some contact point on one of the legs, so it doesn't unbalance. We need to figure out how to add a little mechanical flavor on top of it, because it's a robot in the end, right? And it's made of mechanical parts. So that's why, for example, we try to have the turret and the main body stabilized, and only the lower body with the legs is what is moving around. That gives us two things. First of all, it gives you the feeling of it's a machine, and he's trying to, stabilize the camera around you to follow you better or to target you better with the tracking systems. But at the same time, always when there is some movement on the body and a stabilized head, traditionally in animation and body motion gives you a creepy feeling. So it's something unsettling, which adds to this horror vibe that we have, right?
That animalistic yet mechanical feel would also need to be conveyed in the way the metal monster would be heard. As such, noises were engineered to sound like nothing else, an amalgamation of natural, digital, and demonic worlds.
We wanted the Chimera to sound mechanical, but not fully robotic. We wanted to be also sounding like alive. The robotic growls help a lot with this, and also as the sequence progresses, the vocalization of the Chimera changes from friendly one to really like a almost demonic black hole sounds.
The Black Wall is the corruption at the core of Songbird's story in Phantom Liberty. As such, it needed to sound like an overwhelming force eating away whatever it came into contact with, be that the hulking Chimera or Somi herself. It's an audio hellscape she nor the player can escape.
I think the coolest and the most interesting thing about Black Wall and how it sounds is that it wasn't supposed to be futuristic sci-fi. It's supposed to be, like the descriptors I got from both the narrative director and the lead cinematic designers, they were talking about shamanistic sounds, cyber monsters. Essentially, you would need to create sounds of cyber hell. A lot of it came down to figuring out some synthetic sources that actually sound animalistic and then making them a little bit more cybernetic. So for example, chopping them down into super small sections and stuffing them. So it's like they're glitching out when they're trying to communicate with you, and also a lot of them are growling at you to show that they're aggressive.
Further inspirations for the sound of the Black Wall came from other non-audio departments working on the sequence. This collaboration was made possible thanks to a completely new organisational system, implemented by CD Projekt Red after the release of Cyberpunk 2077. The Spider and the Fly, the mission in which the Chimera appears, was a big test subject for this new way of working.
It was a bit tricky from our side because it was the first time in the company that we were divided into what is called content teams. So it's like a multidisciplinary team based on every discipline that we want to create this sequence. So everyone kind of participate into the design, into their own ideas, indirectly and indirectly around it. So we have environment artists, we have animators, we have designers, we have gameplay, we have level design. So everything together to create the best approach to this. So starting with this pre-visualization, we try to move forward and explore ideas together to see, if this is working, if it's not working, what we need and where. So trust me, it was a very, very, very intricate process.
Such iterations are a prime example of how CDPR's content teams work. Members of every design department needed to be in constant conversation with one another to ensure that the visual design and animation all worked in concert with the sequence's gameplay goals.
We needed to have this heaviness, this weight that it's tons of steel chasing you. But at the same time, later we have a boss fight, so we have to balance it out with gameplay that has other requirements, right? Because this is for me, this sequence is for me one of the biggest achievements we did in terms of blending gameplay with cinematics. We try to all the time mixing those two in several intensities during the whole sequence.
Blending gameplay with cinematics is something that Cyberpunk does elegantly. CDPR aims to never fully take control away from the player, even when a scripted scene is playing out in front of them. It is a finely tuned set piece that demanded a tight relationship between the gameplay and cinematic staff.
This is like one example when the tank is rising up for the first time in this room with the cloth tarp, and he's shooting at you. So he's actually starting to shoot at you in the middle also of his animation that makes him go to gameplay. Normally you would have like cut, like a fade out and fade in, or maybe something will glitch at the transition from gameplay to scene. And in Cyberpunk, especially in this sequence, we always strive for making it invisible, basically. And the fact that you asked me which parts are cinematic means that I did my job well, because it's just unnoticeable. Almost the whole sequence, except for maybe just the fight itself, which is completely gameplay driven, is actually a cinematic sequence. Sometimes intertwined with gameplay, because for example, when Tank is shooting down the Kurt's enemies on the balcony, this is a cinematic animation. There are dialogues being played by the characters. There are even like contextual animations played on V where she's covering her face from the missiles. But the soldiers that are on the balconies actually have gameplay behavior, but we did it in a way that the turret swipe is so, let's say, meticulous that they will die anyways. So it's kind of a risky mix we did, but it worked out in the end.
Quick! Through here! Do you have a death wish?
From here, the mission transports you from the wide open museum space to a tight corridor, made even more claustrophobic by the presence of the Chimera hunting you down. It's a chase sequence built on the principle of knowing when to pick your battles. The tank is too powerful to take down by yourself, and if you try, you'll learn that the hard way.
On your feet! Run!
We kind of try to make sure that it's impossible to fight with it. Even if you approach in that moment, probably he's gonna kill you. There are several fail states that we create along the whole sequence, right? And that one is the first one. But I will say 90% of the players run away at the first time, right? Because it's too scary.
While running forward may be a simple enough task for the player though, it was far from easy for CDPR to make work in this environment.
The chase part was a challenge in that regard, where we had to align the speed of the tank, which wasn't an easy task to do because it was completely animation driven, so any change in his movement would require some animation tweaks also. Align that with how fast the player can go, because the player can be a bit faster or a bit slower, and for every type of your build, it still needs to work and it still needs to feel like he's right on your toes, but he can never catch you if you're actively running from him.
Animation-wise, it was a bit of a challenge to put this gigantic beast inside the corridor because it's pretty difficult to make him move. So we decided that he's destroying everything on his path. It was the best way to, first create this horror feeling, and if you look back in that corridor, which is funny because, I animated kind of everything with the Chimera moving forward, right? And destroying everything on its path. And probably 99% of the players don't look back, which is kind of sad for me, but as well it's kind of successful, right? Because they are scared, they are genuinely scared.
But the chase isn't just about scaring the player, it's also about preparing them for what's ahead.
One of the goals in the sequence for us was to foreshadow as much of the stuff the tank is doing as it is possible. Like for example, you shouldn't be close to it. Like being close to it means death. He has a turret that is deadly. He has a laser swipe that is also deadly. So then when you actually fight him, you know what a given attack is, because we solved it already through the sequence that precedes it.
Before the big fight though, comes a long fall. A floor-shattering descent through concrete and metal, this incredibly complicated transition scene posed some of the biggest technical challenges of the whole sequence.
That was kind of my own personal baby, actually. I wanted to create a bigger action sequence instead of just falling. So I took some inspiration actually from some other places, like for example, the Uncharted 4 clock tower sequence. Like, you are trying to grab for your life in everything you find. We have these cables, you are on top of the tank again, and you have to jump out, you don't arrive, and everything is crumbling around you. And at the same time, to give this scale, I had another inspiration that I like a lot. Gandalf falling with Balrog from Bridge of Khazad-dûm. So it's like this massive falling, but you are still kind of fighting, and you have this behemoth on your side, so that you're watching falling with you, right? And there were a couple of inspirations there to fight with it, and in the end try to achieve this result of insane action sequence that it was very, very difficult from an animation point of view to achieve, actually.
For the longest time, we couldn't really make it work, really. On the reviews that we had, we needed to be like, this will work eventually, please trust us, we will make it happen. But there were some sort of tricks that we had to do there. For example, when V is falling down through the air, when you actually would fall, you would fall much faster. But we had to kind of fake it a bit to achieve better effect and to make it also readable. Because in sequences, especially first-person ones, everything that you see is dictated by your perceivable angle of vision. We really had to be careful on what we present and how, for the player to even understand what's happening with him in that sequence, and achieving that wasn't an easy task. And it went through many iterations.
How do you plan from animation point of view falling through 3 floors in motion capture, right? So what we did is we had an incredible stunt team. We kind of divided into several clips. So you have your fallings, everything is recorded actually in motion capture, which looks insane, but everything is recorded like from the ground level, of course. We're not throwing anyone 3 floors down. Later, we have to cut and clip everything, cut and paste every single bit so it makes sense, but with the same timing and with the same pacing that we have before. And it was incredible to work with that, but it was kind of a gigantic puzzle to build all these animation clips while at the same time having this Chimera keyframe animated on top of it. Try to sync everything. It was a bit difficult, but very rewarding in the end. So this was a very close collaboration with cinematic designers as well to try and nail that timing together with this insane action sequence.
What looks like a simple fall actually turned out to be the most complicated part of the sequence for the cinematics team. Assuring that the most scripted of events looks reactive is an art that they put a lot of time and effort into perfecting.
Nothing there is procedural. Everything that was needed to be directed by us and put in a very specific, deliberate place, or like the distraction that is happening at a very precise moment. Like when you're falling through that concrete floor, the smoke needed to go off at a very precise, specific moment. The pieces of debris needed to clear out for you to be able to see where you're falling, and it needed to be clear that you fall down on the tank and roll off from it. So putting this specific part of the sequence was certainly the most challenging, but also the most fun.
While this sequence delivers cinematic spectacle in spades, Cyberpunk is a video game, not a movie. As such, it's important that there are still flashes of interactivity through the most scripted of scenes. Not paying attention, deadly quick-time events will make you pay the price.
We try to never take the full control from the player for too long. It's kind of like a rule, like a philosophy of ours. Like there cannot be too long scenes, basically. And so on top of it being already difficult and containing multiple elements to piece together to work in perfect sync, we also made it so that you can get hit by the turret if you don't react quickly. If you don't manage to grab the cables, you will bounce off them, basically. And if you don't dodge the spider tank's leg, you get crushed by it. We wanted to kind of test the streamers a bit, that sometimes during the scenes they just tend to look at the chat maybe, not pay full attention to what's happening on the screen. In this case, and actually we witnessed it several times, they just died in the middle of the scene because they weren't paying attention. That's exactly what I'm talking about when we talk about scenes in Cyberpunk. You can never really look away. You can never put down your gamepad and just witness the event.
The biggest challenge for the player was yet to come, however. After landing, the briefest of respites is granted so that you may gain a bearing of your surroundings. Savor those few seconds though, because it's the calm before the biggest storm Cyberpunk has to offer. What was previously seemingly indestructible is now weakened, but that doesn't mean it won't put up one hell of a boss fight.
That's the part where cinematics gets in, and how do we cripple and try to damage this tank in any shape or form, right? So we managed to do all this whole chase, giving you the feeling and the illusion that it's a tough enemy and you cannot face it like this. But after the fall, maybe you had an intense fall that helped you destroy his defenses a little bit, so you can now face the tank.
Motherfucker! Will you just die? The fall wrecked it! Let's go! Kick this tin can to hell!
The fight itself tasks you with taking on the Chimera and its many different weapons. It's here that the design of the tank and the design of the gameplay scenario all comes full circle, with gameplay influencing visual design and vice versa.
On the early production of Phantom Liberty, combat was supposed to happen on the street level. So we were thinking about the range combat, larger distances, big arena. Eventually, in the process of designing the expansion, we decided that it will be all held inside the buildings, right? And eventually in the abandoned metro station, which kind of changed changed the perspective.
The first actual iterations of that boss fight were more navigating around, sneaking around the tank was moving on its own. We didn't have time to do this and at the same time create this horror vibe of chasing you if you open a space straight ahead from the beginning. So the first limitation was like, he's not gonna have a proper locomotion on its own. Locomotion meaning he's gonna move on itself around. So we knew that we wanted kind of circular arena so that he reaches to you with all his arsenal, but he doesn't actually really needs to approach you. So he's rotating kind of its own in the middle.
When we ended up with the design of closing the whole arenas in the interiors, it completely changed the game, right? So we needed to adjust few things. But there was like a constant negotiation with the gameplay team. Basically, gameplay team at the beginning, I remember, they wanted to have like a really fast and agile robot that runs over the ceiling, the walls, and it's all over the place. And we wanted to have something super heavy, static, you know, slow, kind of inspired by Ghost in the Shell. Finding the compromise, it took us quite a time, right? But we found it was negotiating, meeting, talking, you know, designing, experimenting, making storyboards, also repromatics, etc. The device itself, which is kind of designed to kind of fight on the medium and long range, now has to deal with us, the small opponent, which is kind of walking, running around their feet. So we made a lot of adjustments of what kind of weapons it should use, for example, and how it should operate.
There's many weapons on that tank, and some of them very late. For example, we find out that being, I don't want to say completely static, but in the middle of the level, if the character goes too close to it, you can keep shooting. So we added this beam just to make the player go far away from it.
We had this case of the laser weaponry in the base game when you were fighting Roy's boss fight. So he was basically using this laser weapon that can sweep through the environment. So with the Chimera, we wanted to do it times 10. And what we aim here for is this constant feeling of the threat, but also it needed to give the player information that the laser gun is winding up to give them a chance to basically hide behind the cover and avoid the damage.
Watch the laser!
Take cover!
It wasn't just the Chimera's weapons that needed to be tweaked over time though. Its armor also needed redesigning.
Once we had a blockout, I knew that we needed armor. So I started designing the armor and what's underneath the armor and which places we wanted to be destroyed, because we also worked with weak spots and we wanted to, you know, reveal them. We used the Kuroshi eyes to reveal them. So you just need to scan and you see them. So I didn't really need, you know, to make them yellow or too obvious. It would be also kind of stupid for a weapon to show his weak spots. So using the Kuroshi eyes, it's a fantastic solution.
It's another great example of gameplay and art design working in tandem, and it and other similar combinations all build to the fight's grand finale. After exploiting the Chimera's weak spots and disabling it in spectacular fashion, it's time to deal the killing blow. That finisher, involving the tank's beating mechanical heart, is the perfect example of every department of the content team coming together.
We wanted this feeling to slowly, over the course of the sequence, to shift and make you as a player feel more and more in power. Finally, the finisher, we wanted to do this kind of exclamation point after the boss fight to really make the tank go out with the bang.
The gameplay guys asked me kind of late in the production that they wanted something to be used by the player. I was kind of lucky in that case because I had just the spot for it. So yeah, I got lucky there. So there's a cylinder in the top with a hatch that you can open, take the heart, it looks like a heart in fact, and toss it, destroy it.
And we wanted to be the heart to sound consistent with the Chimera approach to sound design when it needs to sound organic but mechanical at the same time. There's a really cool thing and the details in it when you just open the hatch and you can actually start hearing the heart beating, and then once you grab it and you rip it off, you can hear it's basically dying. And then there's a really cool thing when V just throws the heart and it lands on the ground.
So we have this Chimera core that resembles a heart. And that was kind of a conversation internally because we said like, what looks cooler than having a, you know, a beating heart of your enemy in your hand before you finish it off, right? And it's kind of the a metaphor we wanted to do there. And later it was super cool because as well with this content team, multidisciplinary team, we managed to even make it a piece of loot, so later you can craft something out of it. So it's just a very cool ending for it.
We all need to come together, and that's why we work like this in CDPR, that we are in those content teams, because every iteration is an improvement on what we did, and every improvement is a holistic thing.
Rust and piss, shitbot!
Teamwork does in fact make the dream work, but what aspect of the mission are the developers most in awe of from outside their own departments?
I was impressed by not only the tank itself, but how the scene looked. You know, bringing all together and feel like we work well as a team, I think is the best.
I think I was the most impressed by the amount of destruction we squeezed into the sequence, because I couldn't believe it that they said that they will make everything destructible. I was like, how that's even possible? But they really made it. So that was pretty impressive. Every single pillar is being destroyed. It was assumption from the gameplay that they needed every single cover to be destructible to show the force, right? And not make player hide behind the column and just, you know, slowly shoot to the spire to lower his health bar, right? They wanted player to actually face the tank and force the player to actually act.
Michał Brezniak, the cinematic designer, man, this scene was just, with the tools we have in engine, this was a big challenge to set up everything and made it work from every point of view, from blending gameplay with cinematics, from managing all the dialogues, all the screaming around, all the sound. Like, he's kind of was the master orchestrator and putting everything together, right?
VFX, obviously, are a huge part of that, and the whole identity of the tank when it comes to the Blackwell AIs that are taking over him. The way it is presented on him, the way he has those, you know, black and red pieces of corruption on him. The audio, of course, that makes him so menacing and scary, basically.
The enter is kind of already there because of the awesome visuals, and then you have this awesome driving track by P.T. Adamczyk that's also keeping you on the edge. So our job was pretty easy.
So, in a level full of towering machines, crumbling architecture, and complex scripting, you'd maybe expect something explosive to be the biggest challenge the team faced. Well, turns out it's actually all in the much smaller details.
Small things, actually, was to make Myers' rifle be attached to her back when it was necessary. You will not believe how many issues we had with this one. We either had two rifles attached to her back, sometimes the rifle was going directly through her head. This was probably the biggest issue for us in this entire sequence, the small rifle from Myers. If you look at our game, there's never a situation where characters put the guns on their back. It just doesn't happen. But she has a rifle, and since this is a main story, we didn't want to create this artificiality where the rifle is just disappearing when she's putting her away. So we had to come up with a method of her putting the rifle on her back and then taking it again seamlessly. Up until some point we had it easier because Myers at the beginning had a pistol, not a rifle. So it was simple, like, right, she would just hide it in her pants and that's it, the end of story. But no, it was decided that she needs to have a rifle, and the rifle then needs to be a reward for the player that you can also get. And it created a bit of a complication for us. But it was all fun and games.
Apologies.
All fun and games and months of hard work. The Chimera encounter is one of the standout moments of Cyberpunk 2077, a complicated beast at the heart of the Phantom Liberty expansion that wouldn't have come together without all of the different disciplines at CD Projekt Red combining forces tightly. It's a mission with as much heart put in as is taken out of its central beast, and as cool as the metal panels that shield it.
We're clear. I detect no more.
For more Cyberpunk, check out our review of the Phantom Liberty expansion, and for everything else, stick with IGN.